Hello everyone and welcome to our continuing Witchwood card reviews. We're going to be doing Mage now. We're going to be reviewing cards on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is kind of your trash cards like Magma Rager, 2 are kind of your fringe or tech cards like Black Knight or Dragon Slayer, 3 you have your playable cards or cards that are good in like niche archetype decks like Plated Beetle or Deadly Shot. 4 you have staple cards that are popular across all decks in a class, or if they're neutral across many decks, or decks or cards that are kind of deck defining, like Gadgets and Auctioneer kind of defines Miracle Rogue, or Wandering Monster is quite popular across pretty much all the Hunter decks at the moment. And then at 5 we have kind of meta defining cards. These are cards like Call to Arms that are going to define how the rest of the other decks build their decks. So another example is like Void Lord at the moment. These are cards that you have to consider when you're building a deck, no matter what class you're building in. So we're going to be doing Mage now, and we're going to start off with Archmage Arugal. Archmage Arugal is a 2-mana 2/2 legendary minion that reads, whenever you draw a minion, add a copy of it to your hand. So there's a lot of value in this card. How does that make you feel, Pandemonia?
I'm a bit torn because, like, on the one side, it's got potential value, but it's still a card that you have to make work, right? It's not just value. You have to put work into the value.
So you just want value for nothing. You don't want to work for your value.
I like I like neatly
Millennials.
packaged. I like when the value is neatly bundled and given to me.
Uh,
Now this is like IKEA value. Like I have to assemble it.
Well, I mean, obviously, if we look at the value, basically getting an extra card every time you draw is pretty powerful. The problem here is Archmage Arugal is a 2-mana 2/2, so it's not really going to stick on the board, so you kind of need to do it the turn that you play Archmage Arugal, but at least he's 2 mana, so that checks out. You can do quite a bit. You can play Arcane Intellect, you can play Book of Specters, a card we'll get to just now. You can play any of these cards, and I think most of the time, depending on the minion density of your deck, you want to be drawing at least 2 cards. So that you can get at least 2 cards out of Archmage Arugal. So we're going to be looking at effects like Arcane Intellect and those kind of things in particular. Called that Oracle was rotating out, so you couldn't unfortunately play that in a very heavy minion deck. That would have possibly worked as well. So I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of value there. I just think that the problem with Archmage Arugal is it's going to be a little bit fringe in a lot of the decks it's in. It doesn't do too badly on the board on turn 2. At the moment, a 2-mana 2/2 is kind of okay. But
still not exciting. You're not excited to play a 2-mana 2/2.
Yeah, but unless your opponent didn't play anything or you were going first, you're probably not even going to get 1 draw out of the Archmage Arugal then. And I'm not sure that it would be played then in those decks, because Arcanologist is like a big kind of card contesting for that slot in Mage. Which otherwise can be a bit weak. I mean, Pyros is also a 2-mana 2-drop, a 2/2 that you'd rather play on turn 2. So, I mean, these kind of things are definitely count against Archmage Arugal. Overall, I think I would put it as a 3. I think it's kind of playable, and it will do well in particularly dense or minion dense decks. But it's definitely not something we're going to see in like an auto-occlude in Mage decks.
Yeah, I mean, building on that, I honestly think it will be a 4 because I think it will make certain decks, it will define certain archetypes. I think it will be very strong in those minion-based decks, and it will define them and be a star in them. So I'm going to give it a 4.
Okay. That's fair. Next up, we have Toki, Time Tinker. Toki is a 6-mana 5/5 legendary minion with Battle Cry. Add a legendary minion from the past into your hand. First of all, I kind of like what they did with the wording here. Past basically just means cards that are in the wild format currently. They could have just said add a wild legendary minion to your hand, but it obviously is more thematic to have the past for Toki, who is a time tinker. So, I definitely like that. We've kind of spoken about this before. The range of legendary minions is very, very wide. It's all about a third good minions, a third playable-ish minions, and a third really bad ones. Cards like Rend Blackhand, and Millhouse Mana Storm and those kind of things that can be really, really
no.
bad for
Morehouse
you.
Manastorm you won't get because.
Oh, yeah, sorry, my bad. I was just thinking of some of the worst legendaries, and that was one of the ones that came to mind. But yeah, there's a lot of bad legendaries out there. But Toki can generate a lot of value and can definitely win you games. I don't know when you get that Ragnaros Fire Lord or Doctor Boom. You know, these are obviously powerful cards that can come down after Toki. So I mean, where does this kind of leave? Yeah, where does this kind of leave Toki in your thinking?
I'll give it a 2 because I think it will be a fringe sort of card. I mean, it might just be good enough. The fact that he's drawing a card at 6 mana 5/5. So for me, it's too lean towards a 3. It's kind of it's one of those half fun cards, but also half could be useful.
Yeah.
But the problem with it though is literally it's a case of you playing a 6 mana 5/5 and flipping a coin, right? You're either going to get insane value where you draw it's basically 6 mana 5/5 draw an amazing card, or you just play a 6 mana 5/5.
Yeah, I think as a 6 mana 5/5, it's not horrible, and I think you talk about flipping a coin, but if it can help you win matchups you would otherwise lose, that can be quite powerful. We've seen that before with cards like Yogg that have, let's say, a high variance, but can help you win matches you would otherwise lose, and Toki can kind of fulfill that by getting you a really like out of meta, threat
Out
that
of
you're.
class.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, it's a card that's out of the meta, obviously, because it's in from Wild. But this means that most decks are not going to necessarily be able to deal with that threat, right? They're not going to be teched in a way to deal with that, and that can be pretty powerful when Toki gives you those cards. So I'm going to give Toki a 3. I think in some decks that want the extra value and are willing to take the risk, it could well be pretty decent. And Mage doesn't really have much anywhere near the 6-drop, so that's another kind of plus for Toki.
Yeah, expect lots of children videos from this card. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Expect lots of memes.
You'll definitely see a lot of people playing it that open it because it is going to be a fun card to play. I'm just a bit worried about how it's going to be.
I want a golden version. I just realized this. I want a golden version so I can guess the random one will also be gold, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Toki, it's going to be a 3 from me and a 2 from you, I believe you said.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Arcane Keysmith. Arcane Keysmith is a 4-mana 2/2 epic minion. It has Battle Cry, discover a secret, put it onto the battlefield, or put it into the battlefield. So 4-mana 2/2, obviously pretty understated. You're basically paying 2 mana here in a way to kind of get a secret directly into the battlefield. We have cards like Curio Mage that can do that, but with those kind of cards, you have to actually have them in your deck. Arcane Keysmith's real value is that it pulls the secret from outside of your deck, and it can kind of work in very minion-dense decks as a result, or something like Spiteful, where you don't want to put that actual secret in your deck. So, I mean,
basically like Hydrologist, right?
Yeah, it's comparable to something like Hydrologist, except you're getting a more powerful secret, and you can put it into play. There's 8 secrets that are going to be in standard. Potion of Polymorph is the one secret rotating out at the moment. And we haven't got a new secret this set. So at the moment we have Counterspell, Explosive Runes, Frozen Clone, Ice Barrier, Mana Bind, Mirror Entity, Spellbender, and Vaporize. Most of the time, Ice Barrier is going to be pretty bad for you unless you're a control deck. And honestly, most of these other secrets are not going to be good for you if you're a control deck. So I don't really see Arcane Keysmith necessarily seeing much play in control decks. Counterspell and Explosive Runes are pretty powerful. Those are kind of the most commonly seen ones now in Secret Mage decks. Frozen Clone and Mirror Entity can be kind of okay, but a little bit iffy. Vaporize is something that can do well if people don't play around it, but very often you can kind of reduce it down to Vaporize, especially with Ice Block leaving. Basically if you haven't attacked them, now know it's just going to be Vaporize or Ice Barrier. And Mana Bind and Spellbender, very often, like, Mana Bind giving you your opponent's spells isn't necessarily that good, and if you're playing like against a control deck and you get like a Defile isn't necessarily going to be that good if you're the one trying to put on the pressure. Or Spellbender as well can be a bit iffy. There's not a lot of buffs going around at the moment. That is one of the best things for Spellbender to activate on. So, with all these secrets in mind, how do you feel about Arcane Keysmith?
I think it's actually pretty good because as much as you've mentioned how each of the secrets individually are not that good, I think the fact that you're getting the one that's not in your deck, and the fact that you're discovering it means that you can, a lot of it I think will come down to mind games, and also being able to read a situation in terms of trying to figure out what is your opponent trying to do, and then essentially picking the secret that tries to make sure your opponent's turn is as uncomfortable as possible. So I think, like the secrets like Mirror Entity and Frozen Clone, I think have a lot of potential, because a lot of the mage secrets are just disruptive. So even though you might not get the most amazing value out of it, the fact that it puts your opponent off their plans, I really think this card has good potential in like your mid-range and even your tempo mage kind of decks. So I really like this card. Much like Hydrologist was severely underrated, I think this is a card that's also going to be really powerful.
Okay, so I mean, for me, I don't really like the tempo loss of playing a 4-mana 2/2. I think that Mage has a lot of other kind of powerful things it can do at 4-mana, like fireballs, polymorphs, these kind of effects. So I think that's definitely a negative for the card. I'm not really sure there's a deck for it right now. It could definitely be a card that could see some play going forward, but I'm going to rate it a 3. I think it will maybe see its way in and out of decks, but I don't think it's going to be, staple in any particular decks right now.
Yeah, for me it's going to be a 4 because I really do think this card is really powerful.
Okay, next up we have a card that synergizes really well with Archmage Rugal. That is Book of Specters. Book of Specters is a 2-mana epic spell that reads draw 3 cards, discard any spells drawn. So this means you keep minions and hero cards, so you can keep Frostlich Jaina if you do draw
and weapons
that.
if you are running weapons.
Yeah, and weapons, that is true as well, if you're running like Aluneth. So 2 mana, draw 3 cards, sometimes draw 2 cards, I think the best way to look at this. Because even in minion dense decks, you might still want to play some spells like Fireball or Polymorph in a very Void Lord heavy meta that are still pretty powerful. And of course, if you're just playing 2 Book of Specters, you can always hit the other Book of Specters with your Book of Specters. So
I feel sad.
yeah. So let's look at this by itself first before we kind of talk about it with Archmage Rugal. By itself, I think 2 mana draw 3 cards is very powerful. In any kind of mid-range kind of deck where you kind of want to play a lot of minions, which is kind of what any kind of minion dense deck has to be, is generally mid-range or very aggressive, and Mage doesn't really do very aggressive minions that well. So in like a mid-range deck, it's a very good value engine later in the game. It can help you make sure that you have enough threats to keep applying pressure. So, I mean, I just think Book of Specters is a pretty solid card. For me, I'm going to give it a 4.
Also give it a 4, but I think you just also have to remember, though, to assess this card, you have to kind of ask yourself how many cards makes it good. So
Yeah.
obviously, you assessed it based on, you draw 3 cards. But I think, like, for me, the breaking point I think you need to draw 2 cards off of it for it to be
Sure.
good. Because, I mean, drawing 1 card for 2 mana is very meh, and it's not something you really want to be doing. So I think, your deck needs to be angled in a way where statistically you're going to be drawing at least 2 of the 3 cards are going to be minions.
Yeah, I mean,
Or non-spells, shall I say.
that's why, I mean, I kind of opened this up by saying that I consider it as draw 3 cards, sometimes draw 2 instead.
I think I look at it the other way. Draw 2 cards, sometimes draw 3.
I think
See, that's the way I consider
I mean, it depends on the decks you play it in, right?
Yeah.
I think I think this is a card that leans you more heavily towards a heavy minion deck than Archmage Rugal does, even. I think it's more the defining card of that deck that pushes that archetype rather than Archmage Rugal. Obviously, it synergizes amazingly with Archmage Rugal. If you hit 3 minions, you'll get 6 cards in your hand if you play the 2 cards together. Yeah. So that's some very, strong, well-assembled IKEA value for you.
Yeah, damn straight.
So what's your rating going to be for Book of Specters?
Well, we just said, I think we both said we're going to give it a 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Next up we have Bonfire Elemental. Bonfire Elemental is a 5-mana 5/5 with Battle Cry. If you played an Elemental last turn, draw a card. It is an elemental as well. So a 5 mana, 5 mana draw a card on a minion. We've seen like previously on a Zerdrake long time ago before it rotated out.
Long time ago.
That one kind of had spell damage, but it also, and it was a dragon. This one's an elemental, so it can kind of keep your elemental chain going. And obviously it has better stats. 5 mana draw a card and get a 5/5 body. It seems pretty decent to me.
Yes, please. That's. I think this is basically the elemental card Mage needed to, all of a sudden, because I think before this expansion, Elemental Mage was a very fringy archetype at best. And the only real card that actually you really wanted to play, which had Elemental on it, was pretty much Frostless Jaina most of the time, right? That had anything to do with Elementals. Whereas, like, Bonfire Elemental, this is the kind of card that makes me start filtering all the Elementals that I can now put into a Mage deck, and to build a more Elemental-heavy deck, which uses cards like your Blaze Caller, your Servant of Kalimos, and, I think this is the card the deck was wanting.
Yeah, and some of the 4-drop ones like Steam Surge that we've had before with the Elemental Synergy and even Leyline Manipulator possibly. But yeah, there's definitely quite a few ways to curve into it as well with Mage, those 2 4-drops that we just mentioned. So that helps a lot as well. And it's, just kind of a extra redundancy to go with kind of a Servant of Kalimos for a value generation 5-drop for your Elemental deck, which can be pretty useful. And it importantly, it's also an elemental, so it keeps the chain going. That's always an important thing with these kind of elemental cards. The big problem for me with that deck generally is Mage doesn't have a 6-drop elemental, so it's difficult to lead into Blaze Caller, which is pretty much the big payoff for playing elementals. And with these kind of tribes, you always want to have some kind of payoff that pushes you into actually playing that archetype. And Bonfire Elemental is, definitely an extra payoff that you can get alongside something like Blaze Caller.
Well, even just going like turn 5 7 of Kalimos into turn 6 Bonfire into turn 7 Blaze Caller is not even that terrible, right?
Yeah.
As much as it's not mana efficient, that's still, the fact that you discovered a free 5/5 that replaced itself.
Yeah, that's true.
That's just value. That's just value.
Yeah, this is of course a Mage elemental, so Servant of Kalimos will discover it more often as well. So you will see it coming, in those kind of scenarios. There's actually quite a few Mage elementals because there's Arcane Artificer and the Frostwalker or whatever it is, the 2-mana one as well, and the Tempest, Shivering Tempest. There's actually quite a few Mage elementals, but you will still see Bonfire Elemental fairly often. From Servant of Kalimos Discover, which just adds extra value to Servant of Kalimos. I think Bonfire Elemental is pretty solid. I definitely think it's a card that pushes you into the Elemental archetype for Mage, so I'm going to be giving it a 4.
Yeah, it's definitely a 4 for me as well.
Okay, next up we have Cinder Storm. Cinder Storm is a 3-mana rare spell. Deal 5 damage, randomly split amongst all enemies. So you're paying 2 extra mana for 2 extra damage compared to Arcane Missiles. Arcane Missiles is pretty bad. Cinder Storm is terrible for me.
Yeah, when I first looked at it, I was like, maybe it's not that bad. And then I did the math. I was like, wait, no, it's just bad.
Yeah, it's just bad.
Especially, 3 mana. Like, you never want to be playing this on turn 3.
I don't understand their thinking here. Like, how is this, when they printed Flame Cannon, how is this, like, even comparable? 5 damage split is worse than 4 damage to a single thing because you have less chance of actually killing something.
So you think they could have made this 2 mana would be better?
I think they could have made it 2 mana and I still wouldn't play it. So at 3 mana, there's no way I'm playing it.
Yeah, I realize 3 mana feels it's a bit too terrible, I think.
Maybe at 2 mana, as a follow-up to Mana Worm, it would be a very strong curve. But
2 mana I would have probably played it, but 3 mana, yeah.
I don't. Cinder Storm is a solid 1, like it's Arcane Missiles influence for me.
Yeah, I think I gave it a Cinder Storm. I think I gave it a 2 because I think maybe there's some fringe case where you want the extra spell, maybe at some point in the future where the spell damage matters. The damage matters. But I'm not 100% convinced either.
It would have to be a very aggressive Mage deck for Cinder Storm to play, and I don't.
I'm
not sure that.
I just was in the back of my mind. I think he's something like flame waker kind of effect, maybe.
Okay. Next up, we have Curio Collector. Curio Collector is a 5-mana 4/4 mage minion. It is a rare, and it reads, whenever you draw a card, gain +1/+1. So this is obviously similar to something like Daring Reporter, except that it's whenever you draw rather than your opponents. It's also kind of understated. You can play it with something like Book of Specters. You draw 3 cards. It's 7 mana, 7/7. That seems terrible. Why would I do that? And that's the best you can pretty much get on the turn you play it, right? Unless you have like 2 Loot Hoarders on the board and you can make it a 7 mana 9/9, in which case it's still terrible. Curio Collector's terrible.
Yeah, I looked at this card. I saw them play it. I was like, no, thank you. Oh, I do not want to play a 5-mana 4/4.
I mean,
like with no benefit.
The idea is it keeps gaining value over the game, but realistically, that's not how Standard plays out.
Never mind the fact that for it to get, if you don't buff at the same turn, if you play it on 5, you have to wait a whole turn to get its first buff, right?
Yeah.
So for a whole turn, it's a 5-mana 4/4.
That seems pretty terrible to me.
I'd rather just play, I'd rather play a 5-mana spell and play my free Arcane Tyrant, for example.
Yep. Yeah, that's a fair point. Curio Collector is going to be a solid 1 for me.
Yeah, I think for me it's also it's a 1. It's a solid 1.
Next up we have Black Cat. Black Cat is a 3-mana 3/3 beast. It's a common and it has spell damage +1 and battle cry. If your deck has only odd cost cards, draw a card. So this is the odd deck matter, whatever, card for Mage. Reminiscent of Azure Drake at a lower mana cost, but arguably better statted for its mana cost. 3-mana 3/3 that draws you a card and has spell damage is pretty good, but I'm not really sure the odd Mage deck is there, and that's the issue I have.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that a bit later, because that's the thing I tried to build. But, yes. Let's go a little bit back and say, you never want to be playing this without it being in an odd deck, right?
Yeah.
You're never playing this as a 3-mana 3/3 with spell damage.
Yeah.
You're only wanting to play this in the odd Mage deck, where that becomes actually really powerful. So, for me, I gave this a rating of 3 solely because if odd Mage does exist, this will be a very good card in it. But obviously, if odd Mage isn't a very powerful deck, this card will see no play either, right? So, for me, that's kind of the hinge.
Yeah, I think that's kind of true for future expansions. I definitely think that's the case. But right now, and with the basic set we have for Mage and a lot of the power kind of being in even cards, I think that it's going to be a 2 because I think it's going to be, a very fringe card. And the odd thing is in Odd Mage, a lot of the spells that would benefit from the spell damage are even costed. So I actually think it's arguably just a 3-mana 3/3 draw a card most of the time. And I think that's pretty bad.
You lose Fireball, you lose Blizzard, you lose...
you can play Cinder Storm. No.
That's what's best your mana.
Yeah.
There you go.
Sure. Okay. No. I'm going to give Black Cat a 2. It could get a little bit better in the future with more cards, just more cards introduced to the game. There could be more options for the odd cost Mage. But I don't think Black Cat is worth it. I'm going to give it a 2. Next up, we have Snap Freeze, Shatter ++. It's 2 mana, common spell, freeze a minion. If it's already frozen, destroy it. So, much like Shatter, it destroys frozen minions. In this case, it also just happens to freeze them if they weren't already frozen. So, I'd arguably say this is just what Shatter should have been in the first place. Although, it doesn't make sense for the name Shatter. But anyway, Snap Freeze, still pretty terrible to me.
Yeah, this card, there's still the potential synergies with like Glacial Shard and things, but it's still, I think, ultimately it's still bad.
Yeah.
This is a solid 1.
I think Mage doesn't need conditional removal like this when it just has Polymorph at 4.
Yeah, when we have Polymorph, when you have Polymorph, as well as like pretty powerful removal tools like Meteor and Fireball.
Yeah, So
You
yeah.
know, I don't think you need a snap free. Is it?
No, snap freeze is a snap no for me and a 1 out of 5.
Yeah, it's a 1 out of 5.
And then finally we have Vex Crow. Vex Crow is a 4 mana 3/3 beast. Whenever you cast a spell, summon a random 2 cost minion. So you get a free Doomsayer with all of your spells.
Yeah. So this card obviously it's kind of like a mini value engine. Obviously the fact that it's very badly statted is obviously makes you go, you know, you don't really want to be playing a 4 mana 3/3, and obviously generally you want to play a spell the same turn you play this card, this minion, so that you get the value immediately, and then you ask yourself, okay, what cheap spells do you want to play with it, and are those worth it? And then and the only real 1 mana spells are what Arcane Missiles and Mirror Image, right?
Yeah.
And you don't really want to be playing those in the deck. So unless some weird tempo deck becomes a thing, I don't think so.
I think for me the big issue is I don't see the payoff in having a board full of 2/2s with Vex Crow. Mage doesn't have anything that benefits from having a wide board. They don't have board buffs. They don't have anything like that. So for me, I think, yeah, sure, you can get Pyros, I suppose, but no one's off to bring it back for you now either. That's gonna hurt. So I think Vex Crow is a solid 1 for me. I just don't see any reason that Mage wants to summon a bunch of 2 cost minions.
I'm gonna give it a 2 because I think it's a little bit. I still don't think it's good, but I think it's, you know, the fact that it's a potential. It's a mini value engine. I think makes it a 2.
Okay, so moving on to the decks that we have. First up here, we have that Odd Mage you kind of spoke about. Do you want to kind of run us through, you know, some of the interesting synergies and kind of key choices in this Odd Mage?
Yeah, so this is quite a difficult deck because, like, when you go through, like, oh, I want to put this, and you're like, wait, your cards. You know, you can't put these good, even cards. So, I mean, Mana Worm, the sort of quintessential, you know, one mana, 1/3 mage. But basically, I've gone with more sort of a more elemental shell. You know, I've included Glacial Shard and Breath of Gosha have synergies with the Cold Rates. And then, you know, you've got that, like we were talking about earlier, you've got the elemental sort of synergy. So you've got the chain of, like, you know, Son of Kalimas, you've got Bonfire Elementals, you know, for the ultimate payoff of Blazecaller. Then sort of the nice thing about Odd Mage, you can still play Frostless Jaina, which is obviously a very powerful late game card for Mage. But which also then leads me on to why I ran a card like Baron Geddon. So Baron Geddon, it's quite a relatively decent AoE, but also combined with Frostless Jaina, it's because all the damage it deals heals you.
Yeah.
So it's you know, it can be a board clear and restores your health.
Yeah.
And then in between there, I've just you know, it's like Voodoo Doll. I think is a very powerful. It's because you don't have removal options like Polymorph or Fireball. You know, a card like Voodoo Doll serves as, I think, sort of your unconditional removal.
Yeah. So Voodoo Doll, for those that don't know, is a neutral from the Witchwood. It's a 3 mana 1/1 with Battle Cry. Choose a minion, Death Rattle, destroy the chosen minion. So you can combine it with your hero power in order to actually kill a minion for basically 5 mana. And once you get Frosted Jaina online, it kind of will summon a water elemental for you as well, which is a useful synergy. Obviously, the kind of buffing your hero power aspect of Baku kind of clashes a little bit with Frosted Jaina, but ultimately Frosted Jaina is the more powerful effect in the late game because it's summoning the minions for you on the board.
Yeah.
And I think you're happy to overwrite that if the hero power has kind of helped you get to that Frosted Jaina space in a decent position. So even though they kind of look like they clash a little bit there in philosophy, I think it's perfectly fine to override your hero power with a better hero power later in the game. Once
it's more relevant.
Once the original hero power is kind of done its work for you. And you can choose not to play Frosted Jaina if you're just going aggressive and you somehow manage to, snowball the board. You can just keep the hero power and go face, like we see with Hunters, where they choose whether they're going to go the aggressive plan and not play Deathstalker Rex and keep Steady Shot, or other way around.
So I'm I'm not very sold on this deck. I'd be very curious to see how it performs. And I mean, at the end of the day, if it's even worth not running all those powerful even cost cards just for the upgraded hero power. I mean, basically all you gain is the upgraded hero power and the value from Black Cat.
Yeah, and I think Black Cat's kind of the important part in this deck. That if you look at it, there is one synergy card for Black Cat that's reasonable, and that's Breath of Cindergosa, and then there's Flame Strike late in the game. But mostly it's just going to be with Breath of Cindergosa, and I don't really think that that's anywhere near enough. Synergy you're getting from Black Cat, at least from the spell damage side of it. Sure, the 3-mana 3/3 draw kind of works, but I don't think
I'm not sure if it's worth it.
Yeah, I wouldn't limit my deck to just odd cards for that, and I don't think the Mage Hero Power, although it's a really good one when it deals 2 damage, is worth cutting out so many of the good cards like Polymorph and Fireball that are available to mages. So for that reason, I'm not a big fan of the deck, and this is also one of the reasons looking at this deck, and this is why we do these exercises, is kind of looking at this, we're like, wait, what does Black Cat actually do? Okay, and that's kind of why, going back to actually rating Black Cat, why I don't really like it personally. Next up, we have another kind of elemental deck. This is a kind of elemental minion deck, or minion mage, as I'm calling it.
Minion mage.
It's obviously meant to use to get the best out of the power of Archmage Rugal, as well as Book of Specters. The one nice thing with Book of Specters, though, is it doesn't say like you can't put any can't put any spells in your deck. It's not a restriction at the deck building stage, like cards like Baku. Instead, you just sometimes don't draw 3 cards and and you'll just draw 2 cards. So, you can still afford to put cards like Fireball, which is really powerful for any kind of mid-range deck as a finisher, and Polymorph, which is obviously really good to get through things like Voidlord right now. So, for that reason, you can still play those cards. Those 2 spells, I think, are the only ones alongside the Book of Specters. So you have a pretty high chance to draw 3 cards most of the time from your Book of Specters. And we basically have a similar kind of elemental theme going with some cards like Voodoo Doll as well for minion-based removal in this case. And it was kind of difficult, I think, in Mage to curve out nicely. Arcanologist is kind of the best curve a lot of the time. And you don't really want to run that when you're not running secrets, so we're actually playing Lone Champion as well, because a lot of the time you're not necessarily going to have played anything on 1 or 2 with just the Firefly and Pyros as you're pretty much only real 1 and 2 drops per se. So the deck can maybe struggle a little bit against aggro, and for that reason it kind of has some of the taunt options on 3 to kind of stabilize a little bit with Lone Champion and Tar Creeper. And then you've got the elemental 4 drops that we spoke about earlier, Leyline Manipulator, Steam Searcher, going into that elemental chain we were talking about with some Toki, Time Tinker, added in there for value. And if you draw it off your Archmage Rugal, guess what? You're getting 2 Tokis.
Oh, the value! Like, I just had a Kaigasm right there. I was like, oh, if you get Archmage Rugal into that will be a dream, right? That's the dream, right?
Yeah. And Lich King is also obviously a good late game threat, as well as giving you some access to cards that can give you board clear or removal from the Death Knight cards. So that's pretty helpful in a deck that doesn't really have spells that do that naturally. And Frostitch Jaina, obviously, we've kind of spoken about, just a really powerful card. So I'm not really sure that this is anywhere near the best build of the deck, but I definitely think we could see kind of a minion-heavy elemental mage. The big question is just, can that deck be powerful enough compared to a lot of the rush decks that have better initiative, like Warrior and Hunter, and compared to the decks with really powerful board clears like Warlock and Priest?
So I just have a random thought. Do you ever cut the spells completely and just run, like, let's say 2 Pyroblast and run Spiteful Summoners instead?
Yeah, I was considering that. The problem being that you're not playing Book of Specters, and I kind of wanted to build around Book of Specters specifically.
Oh, right. Okay.
So you can't really play Spiteful and Book of Specters, but I 100% agree with you. The Spiteful build is probably better than this, because Spiteful Summoner is going to be a pretty powerful card. We spoke about it quite a bit in our Druid review, because the 10 drops are basically now going to be 2 12 drops, or two 12/12s, 2 8/8 and 1 7/14, you're going to have a pretty high roll when you have that 10 mana cost. So I definitely think that the Spiteful list with just Pyroblast as its one spell can be pretty powerful going forward.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I was just looking at this and I was like, wait, you're not running much spell, you're running a minion heavy deck. Yeah, that's what Spiteful decks like to do too.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I thought of it, but that was obviously the concern there, and not being able to run Polymorph kind of hurts with the, you want to
Yeah.
Polymorph Void Lords. That's largely what the Polymorph's for. And against decks like Hunter, we spoke about like Houndmaster Shore is another good target. Otherwise, you can kind of lose the board quite quickly. So Polymorph definitely has some kind of useful applications there. And then finally, we have a. Actually, I think that's our only other mage deck. Sorry, that was our final mage deck. There's probably some other kind of builds for control mage. The big thing with control mage is losing ice block. So the deck's going to have to be a lot more proactive in its control of the board. But so it is getting some good useful tools like Voodoo Doll that we spoke about. Obviously works well post Frostlich Jaina. So I think there's still going to be a build of control mage, and I'm sure there's probably some kind of aggressive mage that goes Mana Worm into Frostbolt into Fireball, because that's pretty powerful and a good way to kill Warlocks. So those are obviously two other decks that could be quite relevant, but they didn't really have as much new and fun, exciting cards for us to talk about, so we instead focused on these two. So overall, how is your feeling about Mage going forward?
I think Mage is, I mean, even though the loss of specifically Ice Block, does hurt a lot of the slower archetypes, I think, Mage, I think there's more potential now for more mid-rangey and like tempo-y based Mage decks.
Mm-hmm.
Like we saw the Elemental show, and as well as this minion-based with Archmage Arugel and the Book of Specters. I think both of these provide very promising options for the Mage.
Yeah.
And although like I say, I think control mages, I think, will struggle a bit in trying to adapt without, trying to survive without ice block.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's definitely going to be a telling point for control mages. I really do agree. Book of Specters is a very powerful card and could definitely push some new archetypes. Otherwise, we're just going to be seeing mostly Secret Mage, which is another deck that does kind of do quite well against the kind of Q block or control Warlock meta as well to a certain extent. So I think Mage will still be in a relatively healthy spot. I think it'll be maybe around that like tier 2, tier 3 kind of area. Probably not as powerful as Warlock, but it can be a deck that has a lot of tech tools that can, prey on some of the most popular decks, and those kind of decks will always have a place in the meta, especially in tournaments when it comes to targeted strategies.
Yeah.
So that's all we have for Mage. You can find us if you want to follow us on Twitter at PandemoniaZA and myself at Deb_Gaming. Please like and subscribe. More videos are going to be going up all the time now as we're coming up to the release. And obviously the rest of the classes will be coming with neutrals as well. So stay tuned. Well, check out the rest of the videos and enjoy. Cheerio.
Cheers.